They were 5:47 a.m. when the alarm rang for the third time, and Mark Thompson didn't move. The metallic sound echoed through the dark room, mixed with the smell of cold coffee in the kitchen and the heavy silence of the house. On meat, piles of bills piled up like invisible walls, reminding him of every failure, every debt he couldn't overcome. Mark closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. The truck, his only possession, was about to be taken away. His children were far away, and loneliness seemed to crush him more each day. And for the first time in 42 years, a desperate question escaped his lips. "Sir, are you still there?" Outside, dawn was tinting Nashville with orange hues, but inside the small house, Mark felt only darkness. Every red number on the bills seemed to scream. Every collection letter reminded her that time was running out. He knew he needed help, but he didn't know where to look. The phone vibrated on the table. Unknown number that he hesitated, but answered. "Mr. Thompson? This is Richard Allen from TriStar Financial Recovery. We attempted to contact you several times. Your account has been referred to legal collections. If payment is not made within 72 hours, we will begin the asset recovery process." Mark took a deep breath. "My truck is the only asset I have. Then I recommend you protect it by paying off the debt. The balance is $18,420.43, including interest. Want to make a payment today?" Mark swallowed the nervous laugh that threatened to escape. "Do I look like someone who can pay today?" The line went silent. Then the mechanical voice simply said, "We will return in 48 hours." He hung up and left his phone on top of the bills, which were getting heavier and heavier, more and more suffocating. A light tap on the door interrupted the silence. Eradona Howard, elderly neighbor, with a small paper bag in her hands. "Good morning, Mark. I made too many cookies. I thought you might want some." He smiled weakly. "Thank you, Mrs. H. You are an angel." She looked at him, eyes full of understanding. "You haven't been sleeping well, have you? Not much to dream about these days." She nodded. "Saturday morning, Pastor Miller is having breakfast at the church. You should come by. The church people don't need to hear my complaints." "It's not about regret," she said softly. "It's about not to be alone." She patted his arm twice and walked back to the porch. "Think about it. The coffee is good. Better than yours, I bet." Mark stood there, staring into the empty yard. Her words echoed in his mind. Not to be alone. Later, he climbed into the truck's cab. The engine sputtered, but started. It was the last sound that still gave him any meaning. He had heard about a freight in Franklin, half an hour away. It wouldn't pay much, but it would keep the truck moving in the road. Fields stretched to the left and right. Small towns passed like gray and gold spots. The American vastness, which had previously brought him freedom, now only increased his loneliness. It started to rain. Thick drops hit the windshield, rhythmic and insistent. The traffic light. Mark saw a roadside billboard that seemed to light up the drizzle. "Read Psalm 37 for 3 days, and see how God provides." He snorted. Of course, as if a verse could pay bills. And still, I couldn't get those words out of my head. In Franklin, the rain had eased to a drizzle. Mark stopped at Ale Diner, with red booths and a broken jukebox. He only ordered coffee and cake. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with a kind look in her eyes, placed the plate in front of him. "Tough day, huh?" He gave a half-smile. "You could say so. My mother used to say that when life got tough, we should open the Bible in Psalms." He said those words healed. Mark frowned. "Which psalm?" She thought. 30-something. He always repeated, "I never saw the righteous helpless." He was surprised. She laughed softly. "Funny, huh? There are words that find us when we need them most." Mark looked out at the light rain, and for the first time felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in months. Curiosity, perhaps hope. Back at the house, the sky was overcast, and distant thunder rumbled across the horizon, Mark sat on the edge of the bed, holding the Clare's Bible, which had been on the shelf for years. The worn cover and thin pages seemed to call to him. He opened the Salmo 37. I was young, and now I am old, but I never saw the righteous abandoned, nor his descendants begging for bread. Mark read it once, then another, on the third. The voice failed. Tears flowed. He closed the Bible and murmured, "If you're still there, Lord, I'm listening." The next morning, sunlight filled the kitchen. The beads remained in the same place, but something inside him had changed. IT wasn't money. It wasn't a solution. It was a silent peace that I hadn't felt in months. He looked at the cross on the wall, then placed the Bible on the table next to the collection letters. He whispered, almost inaudibly, 3 days. Let's see what the Lord can do. And he left the house, without knowing that, in that simple gesture, something invisible had already begun to change. The sun was still low when Mark left Franklin, the light drizzle still dripping on the truck's side mirrors. The road before him seemed endless, but the silence inside the cabin weighed more heavily than the distance traveled. Took a deep breath, trying to expel the tiredness and constant feeling of failure that had been with him for months. As he drove, his mind wandered to memories he usually avoided. The day Claire died, at her 42 years old, leaving Ethan only 13. The first months of financial struggle, when he believed that everything could be fixed with hard work. The promises he had made to himself to never give up, which now seemed empty in the face of the bills that piled up and the collection calls that never stopped. The small cell phone on the dashboard vibrated again. It was a message from Ethan. "Dad, I know it's hard, but I'm trying to understand. Can we talk tonight?" Mark looked at the road, feeling a mixture of relief and guilt. He wanted to answer. He wanted to say that everything was fine, but he couldn't lie. There was no way to say I was at peace when every penny, every kilometre travelled, seemed to slip through my fingers like water. He responded with just a waving hand emoji. Simple, distant, but enough to keep the connection going. As he drove on, familiar Tennessee landscapes passed by the window. Corn farms, rusting sheds, houses with American flags fluttering in the wind. Mark knew every bit of that route, every bend in the road, every traffic light that indicated small towns with sonorous names like Springfield, Lebanon, Hendersonville. But none of this brought comfort. Each place seemed to remind him of everything he had lost or was about to lose. Freedom, security, time with his son, even his faith itself. When he arrived in Franklin, he parked in front of a convenience store he had known since Ethan was a child. He went in to get water and a granola bar, and was greeted by Senior Reynolds, a stout, grey-haired man who has owned the store for over 40 years. "Hey, Mark," he greeted with a tired smile. "How are you?" Mark replied, forcing a smile. Mr. Reynolds studied him for a moment, sensing the weight on his friend's shoulders. "Doesn't look good, son. Still struggling with that truck, huh?" Mark sighed. "Yeah. It's difficult, but I keep trying. I know how it is. But listen," the man said, leaning in slightly, "never underestimate the power of a leap of faith. Sometimes we think all is lost, but life has a funny way of surprising us." Mark just nodded, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. The day's work started late, and Mark drove to a small furniture factory outside Franklin. The freight was small, but enough to guarantee fuel and a few bills paid, as he was carrying the furniture. He felt the physical fatigue mixed with emotional pain, a weight that seemed to pass through the bones. Each box he lifted reminded him of the life he dreamed of and the promises he could never keep. During a break, he sat on the edge of the truck and looked up at the sky, partially obscured by grey clouds, the same clouds that accompanied his days, silent and impassive. It was at that moment that something unexpected happened. An elderly lady, walking slowly, approached. She looked lost, but her eyes shone with a natural kindness. "Hello. Sorry to bother you," she said. "I'm Clara Evans. Hi," Mark replied, surprised. She held a small, worn Bible in her hands. "I used to come here for the same job when my husband was still alive. But today, I felt I should give you this," he said, handing her the book. Mark looked at the Bible, surprised and confused. "I don't know if I can accept." "Just read it," she replied with a calm smile. "Start with Psalm 37. Just 3 days, morning and night. You'll see what amazing things can happen." He opened his mouth to protest, but her words carried a weight he couldn't ignore. It was as if Ailde's soft and firm voice echoed within his own soul, telling him there was something beyond what he could see. For the rest of the day, Theobald rested on the truck seat as Mark drove along the damp, silent roads. He tried to focus on the cargo, the maps, the deliveries, but he couldn't get the lady's words out of his mind. Only 3 days. On the way back, he stopped at a small gas station. The woman at the cashier, noticing his tired expression, commented, "Tough day, huh?" Mark sighed that it's really not easy. "Look, my mother used to say that when life is heavy, opening the Bible and reading the Psalms calms you down. She was talking about Psalm 37. I never saw the just helpless," she said. Mark nearly choked. The same psalm Clara Evans had mentioned, now coming from someone else, sounded like a signal, an impossible coincidence. He thanked her and walked back onto the road, silent, but with something awakening inside him, almost forgotten curiosity, maybe a spark of hope. When Mark arrived home, he found Ethan waiting on the other end of the line. They talked for hours, no lies, no beating around the bush. Just father and son sharing their difficulties, fears and small victories. Ethan talked about his studies, his work, and even his desire to help him. Mark felt his heart lighten, not because of the problems being solved, but because of the simple fact that not being alone anymore. That night, Mark opened Claire's Bible again. Psalm 37 was there, and he read it slowly, repeating each word. "I was young, and now I am old, but I never saw the righteous abandoned, nor his descendants begging for bread." They listened twice, then closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. There was no magic, there were no immediate solutions, but there was something he hadn't felt in months. Calm in the heart, subtle confidence, and a feeling that something was about to happen. The chapter ends with Mark lying down, staring at the kitchen ceiling, where moonlight streamed in through the blinds. The bills were still there, the debt still unresolved, but he felt something new, a quiet strength and a promise that better days could be on the way. He muttered to himself, 3 days. Let's see what God can do. And so, with a mixture of offendedness, hope and contained faith, Mark closed his eyes, ready to face what would come the next day. The morning began cold and grey in Franklin. The wind swayed the trees, scattering wet leaves across the sidewalk. As Mark prepared the truck for another day of deliveries, he felt the accumulated fatigue of the last few months, but something inside him remained different. A small spark of hope, born from Psalm 37, conversations with Clara Evans, and the mysterious billboard on the road. Still, Mark didn't know that day would change everything. As he picked up the first load, he realized that the phone vibrated non-stop. Ethan tried to call again. Mark answered, surprised by the anxiety in his son's voice. "Dad, you need to hear this. I don't know how to explain it, but my college, they found a mistake in my financial aid. I'm going to get a jackpot I never imagined. Can you help here at home?" Mark felt his heart race. It wasn't much, but it could ease the pressure of a few months of overdue bills. "Of course, son, of course. Let's get organized. The call ended, but something remained in his mind. A domino effect of small blessings seemed to begin. He remembered Clara Evans's words. 3 days. Just 3 days. For the rest of the day, the sky grew even darker. Mark headed down the road, each mile increasing the tension. The cargo he was carrying was valuable, and the client in Nashville had strict demands. When he stopped for coffee at a roadside gas station, he noticed something strange, an envelopino sender placed on the hood of the truck. He opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter from a former creditor, announcing that, by administrative error, an old debt had been cancelled. Mark read and reread it several times in disbelief. $18,420.43. Half of that no longer needed to be paid. He fell to his knees beside the truck, feeling the cold, wet ground beneath his hands. Tears flowed, not just of relief, but of an emotion he hadn't felt in years, silent gratitude and amazement at the inexplicable. As she took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure, the truck's radio started playing an old song, the same one Claire used to listen to when Ethan was a kid. The lyrics seemed to speak directly to him. When all seems lost, trust and move forward. You are never alone. Mark smiled with irony and emotion at the same time. It was as if the universe, or God, was speaking directly to him. He felt that the story of his life was about to change, but I still didn't know how. Later, at the delivery in Nashville, Mark found an elderly woman at the door, wearing a worn red coat, eyes full of wisdom and compassion. "Mark Thompson?" she asked, as if she already knew him. "Yes. Can I help you?" She smiled. "I am Linda Evans. My husband told me about you. He said you're struggling, but you have faith." I don't know if I have enough faith," Mark admitted. "It's not a question of having enough faith," she replied calmly. "But open your heart. You read Psalm 37, didn't you?" Mark nodded, surprised. She held out her hand, offering a small envelope. "Inside are documents that can change your financial situation. Trust me. Open it in 3 days and see." Mark felt his heart race. It wasn't superstition. It wasn't luck. It was something bigger, something inexplicable, but which required trust. On the way back, Mark drove with extra care. The small blessings that had accumulated, Ethan's call, the letter from the creditor, the meeting with Linda, began to form a pattern he could not ignore. For years he had felt alone and lost, but now I felt that God was guiding every step. The rain returned, harder this time. The heavy drops on the windshield reminded him that even in the midst of hardship, something invisible and powerful was moving his life forward. He pulled over to rest, opened his Bible again, and read Psalm 37 again, this time out loud. "I was young, and now I am old, but I never saw the righteous abandoned, nor his descendants begging for bread." As he spoke those words, Mark felt a weight off your shoulders. It was as if every debt, every worry, every mistake from the past was being laid before God, and now he didn't need to carry it alone. Upon entering the house, he found Ethan at the door, backpack on his back. "Dad, I knew you'd be surprised," the son said with a shy smile. "The financial aid will cover more than half of our debt." Mark hugged Ethan, feeling every inch of him. Fear and frustration dissolved. "We'll do it, son. We'll do it together." As they talked, Mark realized that the biggest victory was not financial. It was a connection with the son, the certainty that they still had each other, and that faith could guide them even in the darkest moments. That night, Mark opened Linda Evans's envelope. Inside, documents and clear instructions for renegotiating debts, and a small card with a handwritten phrase. Faith acts where the impossible begins. Trust for 3 days. Mark smiled. He didn't know exactly how it would all happen, but something inside him woke up. He placed the card on the table, opened Claire's Bible, and read Psalm 37 one last time before going to sleep. Before closing his eyes, he looked at the wooden cross on the wall. The words echoed in his mind. I never saw the righteous helpless. Mark closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, felt that the weight of fear transforms into a mixture of hope and curiosity. The turning point had occurred. Mark was no longer just surviving. He was beginning to believe that transformation was possible. The sun had not yet fully risen when Mark woke up. The silence in the house was deep, almost palpable, and he could hear the ticking of the clock on the bookshelf, marking every second of uncertainty that still hung over his life. But there was something different that morning, a steady calm, almost impossible to feel in months of fear and debt. He stood up, Claire's Bible still open on the table, and read the text again. Psalm 37, not as a mechanical ritual, but as a living declaration of faith. I was young, and now I am old, but I never saw the righteous abandoned, nor his descendants begging for bread. As he said these words, he felt aslant energy runs through your shoulders, as if every worry had been placed in invisible but powerful hands. Mark knew it wasn't enough to just feel. It was time to act. He started the day with firm steps. He called the creditor who had cancelled part of the debt and began to renegotiate the rest, this time with courage and conviction. Every call was proof that he was no longer alone, that something greater guided every word, every decision. As he spoke, he remembered the faces of Ethan, Clara Evans, and Linda Evans, and felt an invisible but real chain of support, involving your life. The fear was still there, but it had been replaced by a determination Mark hadn't known in decades. Mid-morning, the phone rang again. IT was the Nashville client who needed to confirm the delivery of high-value furniture. Mark, accustomed to feeling pressure and anxiety, realized that this time was not overcome by fear, but for clarity and confidence. He solved every problem, every doubt, with patience and firmness. For Mark, every small victory was a reminder that faith combined with action produces real results. Upon returning home, Mark found Ethan in the garden, tinkering with the old car they had been trying to fix for weeks. "Dad, look," Ethan said, a twinkle in his eye. "I've managed to get everything organized so I won't be late on the insurance payments anymore." Mark smiled, feeling his heart warm. "You're growing up, son," he said, hugging Ethan, "and we're going to get through this together." That hug wasn't just physical. It was the embrace of hope, reconnection, and renewed faith. Mark realized that debt was no longer the center of his life. Now, what mattered was the certainty that God was present at every step. That afternoon, Mark went to visit Linda Evans. She greeted him with a serene smile, as if she already knew he had reached a decisive point. "So, Mark," she said calmly, "have you noticed that the impossible has started to become real?" "Yes," he replied, emotionally, "but I don't know how to thank you." Linda looked into his eyes, with a deep expression of compassion and wisdom. "Gratitude isn't just about feeling, Mark. It's about live according to what we have received. Share and let others see that there is hope." At that moment, Mark understood. The real climax was not just financial, but spiritual and emotional. He had faced his fear, trusted in providence, reconnected with his son, and taken actions that transformed your life. Later, on the way back, Mark stopped at the top of a hill overlooking the road to Franklin. The late afternoon light illuminated the trees, and the sky was tinged with golden and pink hues. He took a deep breath, feeling every problem, every difficulty, and every tear being replaced by peace and clarity. And then he whispered, almost in prayer, "Lord, thank you for showing me that I am not alone." that even in the most difficult times, you provide. The wind blew softly, and Mark felt as if the universe was responding to their faith with silent signs of approval. That night, Mark and Ethan sat at the table with their accounts reorganized, and their future, for the first time in months, seemed manageable. "Dad, we can do it," Ethan said. "I'm sure of it." Mark smiled, looking at his son with pride and tenderness. "Yes, son. Let's go. Always." He realized that the biggest transformation didn't come just from small financial victories, but from emotional and spiritual growth that adversity has brought about. Fear was replaced by courage, loneliness by family bonds, doubt by faith. As Mark prepared for bed, he opened his Bible again and read Psalm 37 one last time before closing his eyes. "I was young, and now I am old, but I never saw the righteous abandoned, nor his descendants begging for bread." He closed the book, feeling a deep peace, a weight that dissolved and a clarity I had never felt before. The climax of their journey had arrived. He had faced the height of fear and uncertainty, and come out the other side with faith, hope, and action aligned. Mark with emotional, spiritual, and practical evolution, and transmitting an inspiring message for mature audiences. The Franklin sun rose slowly, bathing the streets of the small town in a serene golden light. Mark Thompson looked out the kitchen window, sipping his coffee, and for the first time in months he felt a deep and lasting peace. The beads were still on the table, but now they weren't symbols of fear or anxiety. They were reminders that every problem had a solution when faith and action came together. He watched Ethan, who was packing his backpack for school. "Good morning, Dad," said the son, smiling. "Good morning, champion," Mark replied, feeling pride and tenderness course through every fiber of his body. The now confident boy knew that the days of financial insecurity and uncertainty were behind him, not by luck, but by the persistence and faith of his father. That same day, Mark decided to visit the church where he had found support in recent days. Pastor Miller welcomed him with a warm hug. "Mark," he exclaimed, "you don't know how your story has inspired others." Mark smiled shyly. "I just tried to follow the right path, Pastor. I just trusted what I learned." "And look," said the pastor, "your faith has not only transformed your life, but it is also touching other families here in Franklin. Some have asked how you managed to move on." Mark then realized that the real reward was not just personal, but also the impact that their courage and persistence could have on others. He felt the weight of responsibility and gratitude, but also a serene joy in being able to share your experience. As he walked through town, he noticed neighbors greeting him with smiles and kind words. The same man from the cafe who had previously commented on difficulties nodded enthusiastically. The small actions and the presence of Mark, now Whithorn aura of confidence and hope, made it a silent beacon for the community. He realized something important. Yesterday's adversities had become today's lessons. Every mistake, every debt, every tear had built a stronger, wiser man, more connected to what really mattered. At home, Mark opened Linda Evans's envelope one last time. Inside was a short letter. "Faith that turns into action never returns empty. May your life always be a reflection of the hope you have received." He smiled, touched, and placed the card on the table next to Claire's Bible. "God really did provide," he murmured, feeling a warmth of gratitude flood his heart. Ethan walked into the kitchen with an infectious smile. "Dad, do you think we could start a new project together?" the boy asked excitedly. Mark hugged his son, laughing softly. "Of course, son. Now, let's build something together." It wasn't just about money. It was about life, legacy, and reconnection. Over the next few weeks, Mark reorganized his life. The remaining debts were negotiated, The truck continued to be his livelihood, and his relationship with Ethan grew in trust and complicity. But the greatest gift was not financial. It was Ina's certain tranquility of heart, in the certainty that he was not alone and in the strength to believe in the impossible. He began participating in small support groups at church, helping other families with financial and emotional difficulties. Mark realized that shared faith was multiplied, and that every act of generosity, every word of hope, made a difference. One night, sitting on his porch, watching the moon reflect on the nearby lake, Mark reflected on everything that had happened. The debts that seemed insurmountable, loneliness after Claire's death, the moments of doubt and despair, the little coincidences and signs that were actually guides for your transformation. He realized that at every step there was a lesson in patience, faith, and courage, and that true wealth was not in money, but in the ability to trust, act, and remain steadfast in the face of adversity. The last chapter of Mark's story doesn't end with instant glory, but with conquered wisdom. He understood that difficulties are opportunities for growth. Active faith transforms fear into action. Love and family bonds are more valuable than any material wealth. Every small gesture of trust and kindness reverberates in the lives of others. As Mark closed his eyes to sleep, he felt a deep sense of peace. The past still existed, but it no longer controlled his life. The future, although uncertain, was full of hope, and he was ready to welcome him with an open heart. The next morning, Franklin woke slowly, but inside Mark something had blossomed. IT wasn't just financial relief. It was a complete renewal of the soul, a silent certainty that even in the darkest moments, providence can appear in unexpected ways. He knew life would still have challenges, but now he had strength, faith, and courage to face them. And so, as the sun rose over the horizon, Mark and Ethan set off together, walking to school